some sense of it all, but I can see it makes no sense at all. Is it cool to go to sleep on the floor? 'Cause I don't think that I can take anymore. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you.
Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. Today is Sunday. I think it's Sunday, December 28th, 2025. It is Sunday. And silver is a big story again today. Not surprised by that, but it is. There are people explaining what's going to happen next and next big dates. And they're saying, basically, what do you think is going to happen with this silver squeeze? And they're going to say, he's saying people who own paper silver. So if you own silver that is just in stock form, paper silver, then you are going to get a cash settlement. And everybody else is going to be charging a premium for their metal. And so people who have been stacking silver, this is the time you've all been waiting for. So it's wild times. And good news, I guess, really from broadly, it means that the old system is cracking under the pressure that Trump seems to be exerting. The system was always a house of cards. All you needed was somebody to close a door in a really, really, I don't know, big bravado way. Trump's good at that. And the whole house of cards collapses, and we're watching that. And obviously I'm simplifying it a lot, but it didn't take much for this house of cards to collapse. And that's interesting. That's notable. And so how cantilevered and leveraged and made up is this whole thing? We may just see. And what's real? Seems like precious metals are real. Platinum's gone up as well in cost. There's a whole bunch of other metals that I've seen increase in cost, but silver's the big story. Larry Brock is meeting with Apple to discuss the balance between public safety and privacy. Sure, sounds great. Yay. Conservatives and liberals and conservatives, uniparty, right? More people are the victims of our healthcare system. I got emails yesterday, and I'm not going to share that story because I asked and I haven't heard back, but I came across another story on X today talking about somebody else whose family member died in the healthcare system. And it's much more, it happens a lot more than you think. And the number of people who are impacted at any one time is a limiting factor. And so these stories are easy to sweep under the rug, right? Because you become tired, you have life to live, you have this grief to go through. It's very difficult to tell everybody that, hey, healthcare is collapsing around you when you're in the middle of all of that, right? So, and so the system gets worse and worse, and nobody is able to really communicate. And if they are able to communicate, they're silenced. And Ukraine, well, what's Christmas without another couple of $1 billion to Ukraine, right? Says Mark Carney. So he's gone off to Nova Scotia, Noel, and given $2.5 billion to Ukraine. Why? I don't know. I thought they were close to peace. Why do they need $2.5 billion more dollars? Seems hinky to me. Lots to get to. Let's get to it first. We've got to start at Ukraine. BRICS says Russia's foreign minister Lavrov says Europe is the main obstacle to peace, and Canada is acting as a proxy to Europe and giving money and support to Ukraine. And we're playing dumb, but we're actually operating at quite a high level to undermine everything Trump is doing and the peace process, I think, despite the fact that Carney is saying, oh, yes, we're all for peace and your historic leadership, Mr. Zelensky, has led to the peace deal, blah, 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 bullshit. It's all nonsense rhetoric to get people on board with their position, I think. Alternative news is highlighting the corruption in Ukraine. And indeed, I've got a whole article talking about the corruption in Ukraine that came out the same day as we gave $2.5 billion to Ukraine for something, for war making. And again, my position is if we in Canada are spending tax dollars or borrowing on the taxpayer promise of paying it back, we are taxed too highly. If we have enough money to send to foreign countries for war, we are paying too much in tax. It's not our responsibility. It's not our war. This doesn't go to our NATO bottom line of 5% of our GDP. This is nothing to do with us. And yet we keep inserting ourselves. I don't know why. And everybody in the political sphere, including the conservatives, are pretending that this is an important thing for Canada to do. And I can't help but think, Isn't it more important to get a trade deal done with the United States? Isn't it more important to look after ourselves domestically? Isn't it more important to look after our own homeless and our own country, which has its own issues? That's not a war with Russia, but we seem to be coveting a war with Russia, and we'll fund Ukraine till some fictitious peace deal some fictitious victory, comes to fruition. That isn't through a peace deal that Donald Trump brokers, mind you. It seems ideal. It seems like we're all on Ahab's boat and he's chasing the white whale. And I'm done with this, man. Right? But I was done at the beginning. I said, white whale. I thought we were on a fishing expedition. We're not going home right after this? Are you kidding me? Moby Dick 2, the Squire's notes, right? Ahab's at it again. Freaking guy got us up at 2 a.m. White whale my ass. Alternate news says Ukrainian MPs have systemically received bribes for their voting behavior, says Der Spiegel. That's a German newspaper. I believe it's a German newspaper. The Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine is investigating several members of parliament on suspicion of bribery. Their security forces are said to have prevented the search of offices. So the official security officers, who they're paying with our tax dollars, prevented the search of the anti-corruption group. Great. Super good. Let's fund more of that. Nope, not interested. Here is, I've got multiple videos of Carney promising $2.5 billion to Zelensky. This one's the longer one. Tokyo Rosie says, I'd like to take this opportunity to hand over $2.5 billion in Canadian tax dollars to Ukraine. This will go towards construction contracts in Ukraine, which Brookfield will benefit from handsomely. So the scam is right out in the open. I didn't actually hear that quote. I think that's Tokyo Rosie taking some creative liberties. Here is what Mark Carney said. I believe this is real video and not AI. Here we go.
Point on Canada.
Oh, and it's too fast. It has been at least 2 days since the last incident of fast talking. Apologies, everyone. We'll back it up just a little tiny bit.
We've provided military assistance, further military assistance. We're announcing today further economic assistance for Ukraine. $2.5 billion worth of economic assistance that helps unlock financing from the IMF, from the World Bank, from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, to begin this process of rebuilding. We have an important bilateral meeting and then a meeting virtually with our colleagues from the coalition of the Willing Il y aura une réunion bilatérale.
And then he goes into French and starts talking. There's more in the build-up. There's a minute before he starts talking about the $2.5 billion. He's blowing sunshine up Zelensky's butt, saying, "Isn't it great that you were able to negotiate a peace deal, Mr. Zelensky? And this $2.5 billion is going to go to rebuilding Ukraine," which is why Tokyo Rosie is saying that it'll be Brookfield contracts that get it. Before that, it was SNC-Lavalin, which was Justin Trudeau's darling, same as Brookfield, although apples and oranges. Carney has more conflicts than Trudeau ever had, although Trudeau's family has a long history. Maybe the contracts or the connections are harder to see. Who knows? Randy Hillier is responding to this. He says, while many Canadians face serious financial hurdles with unemployment, food and housing costs, Ukraine, the world's most corrupt country that is on the cusp of complete failure and defeat, gets another $2.5 billion. Someone should tell banker Carney that Zelensky has a very poor credit score. Yeah. When you put it in those terms, kind of funny. Concerned Canadian says Carney has promised another $2.5 billion to Ukraine. 1, never debated in the House of Commons. 2, no total released of the aggregate funding to date. So what's our running total here? What's the bill? Right? This is one heck of a bar bill. Who approved this? Nobody. Just Carney. This was a unilateral decision. The money was not included in the budget. Canada has major issues that Carney is blatantly ignoring. Truth. Absolute truth. Moose on the Loose says, do you support Carney pledging another $2.5 billion in aid to Ukraine? And Melissa says, definite no. And Wealth Moose continues. He says, by the government's own disclosures, Canada's Ukraine commitment is now north of $36 billion. At the same time, we have $80 billion deficits, borrowed money, ERs overwhelmed, people dying in the ERs. We'll get to that in a minute. Housing broken. So let's be clear. Canada, we're borrowing money to fund Ukraine while Canada and Canadians can't find doctors or afford rent. What kind of obsession is this? I do wonder. And he's tagging Pierre Poilievre, but Pierre Poilievre hid Andrew Scheer behind the curtains in order to pass the Liberal budget. So I don't know that he's going to come in and say, oh, wow, this is a bridge too far. He's Slava Ukraini too. Everybody is. That's what's weird about all this. How can every party agree that, yes, Canadians need to spend all of our tax dollars on a foreign country's war? Why is that the most important thing? I don't understand or agree. And yet everybody seems to close their eyes that the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, and everybody else, all on board, all want the same thing, which is not at all what people that I talk to want. Everybody that I talk to says, this is pretty crazy to throw our money into this dumpster fire like this. And so I think that a lot of people feel that way. But again, there's no vehicle for people to go to support to stop this. And if you look at what's happening in the United States, anybody who supports Donald Trump, which is a vehicle to stop this madness, they're made fun of as racist. They're maligned. They're called dumb. They're called cult members. They're all sorts of names. So the same thing would happen if somebody rose to power in Canada and said, I'm going to stop the globalists from stealing all the tax dollars from Canadians. If you started saying that, you would become enemy number one. You would become the guy who needs to be dealt with. You would be the racist, the biggest racist in Canada, so on and so forth. You may be debanked because of your views. You might be arrested, as is happening in Australia. In Australia, they're using what's the guy's name? I can't remember the guy's name, but they're using, let's say World War II, because I don't want YouTube to ding me on this, but they're using imagery and branding from the Second World War, right? Germany. And so Australia is using that as justification to jail these guys. And so it's very interesting, because if you push back and say, I want to fix this in a way that makes sense from a nationalistic standpoint, Canada first, America first, right? Not Ukraine first in Canada. That's not the point. They say that's very Germany 1942, and we need to crush that ideology, and then they put you in jail. And so it's interesting, because you're not allowed to talk about the problem. And if you do talk about the problem in a way that's convincing, they say, oh, that's very German of you, right? And so Jason Kenney loves this. He is responding to Mark Carney. Mark Carney says, Ukraine's cause, freedom, democracy, sovereignty. Democracy? They suspended elections, and then they agreed to run elections after Trump said that they had to run elections, but then they didn't do anything. And then they got $2.5 billion from us. Democracy? Ukraine is not an example for democracy, and they have nothing to do with us. They have nothing at all to do with us. This war got started in 2014 by Victoria Nuland and her CIA buddies, and everybody's ignoring that. And that's so weird, right? And we need to spend money on this? Give me a break. Like, when are we going to be honest about what's going on? It's crazy. It's crazy. But Jason Kenney loves this, okay? So he loves giving $2.5 billion to Ukraine. He says, thank you for this leadership, Prime Minister Carney. Proud that Canada continues to stand with the brave people of Ukraine against Putin's unprovoked and murderous war of aggression. Nope. But these are the leaders, and this is the approved official line. And Slava Ukraini, that's democracy and freedom. Thank you for that, Prime Minister, says Jason Kenney. So none of these people work for you. I don't know who they work for, but it sure as shit isn't me. And it's not you either, okay? Unless you're a globalist who is watching this, in which case, yes, they work for you. Tom Mazzaro is responding to this, and he says, you're a criminal, Carney. You and your entire criminal cartel are all thieves. Ukraine hasn't had a functioning democracy since 2014, so spare us your bullshit about freedom and democracy. You were the architect of freezing our bank accounts when we exercised our charter rights and freedoms in 2022. I remember your article on 7th of February 2022 when you called for our rights to be stripped from us because we disagreed with people like you. You're a psychopath, warmonger, and a thief. And no, all of that is accurate if you ask me. Here is Stacy. She says, same headline, two headlines, same day. First headline is CTV News, Ukraine anti-corruption agency tries to raid parliament. So, but they failed because the security services that we're paying for didn't let them. And then the other one is Canada gives $2.5 billion to Ukraine for economic aid for Ukraine. Right. Good job, everyone. The most corrupt country on earth. Here's $2.5 billion more. Don't question it, or you're Pro-Russian? You pro-Russian stooge, you, right? Wild. Ukraine's anti-corruption agency attempts raid of parliament in new graft probe. Ukraine's anti-corruption agency said Saturday that security services were blocking its attempts to raid parliament as investigators allege that the sitting MPs were implicated in a new graft probe. The probe comes at a delicate time for President Zelensky as he seeks better terms for Ukraine in U.S. brokered peace talks. Ukraine's anti-corruption agency said the security services were preventing officers from raiding the parliaments on Saturday, as investigators said some MPs were implicated in a new graft probe. Ukraine was embroiled in a string of corruption scandals that led to the resignation of the chief of staff to President Zelensky. The chief of staff was involved? No, you're kidding me. Do you have any evidence anybody else was involved? No. Great. I mean, yes, good. I knew everybody else but him was clean for sure, says Zelensky. So yeah, the chief of staff of Zelensky is definitely the bad guy here. Nothing to see here, everybody. Carry on. Next question. Definitely the chief of staff and not Zelensky. Nobody connected to Zelensky as well. Definitely everybody else is squeaky clean, for sure. Just that one guy. They also revealed a $100 million kickback scheme in the battered energy sector masterminded by an alleged personal friend of the president. That guy too, done. He's no longer a personal friend. We've cut him out of pictures like Stalin did, right? Cut that guy out. He's gone. Erase him. Gone. Done. Nabu and Sapu following an undercover operation. I don't know what Nabu and Sapo are, so hold on a second. Following an undercover operation exposed an organized criminal group that included members of the parliament, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Okay, so that's what NABU is, National Anti-Corruption Bureau is. Said employees of the state security department are resisting NABU officers during investigative actions in committees of the Verkhovna Radar of Ukraine, it added, referring to Ukraine's parliament. The anti-corruption agency did not reveal the details related to the investigation. So, seems weird that we're signing up to give those guys more money. Super duper weird. Dame says the West, more broadly, not just Canada, has given $500 billion to Ukraine, which is ranked one of the most corrupt countries on earth. In 3 years, this war is nowhere close to being over because Zelensky is incentivized to continue it. Yes. And we're incentivizing it with more money. CBC's got an article about this. Zelensky meets with Carney in Halifax before Ukraine president talks with Trump in Florida. So he gives Zelensky some leverage for his talks with Trump after giving $2.5 billion. I don't know, man. Seems super duper weird. Lavrov declares that any EU soldier in Ukraine will become legitimate targets of the Russian military. I think that makes sense. This is a great picture of Lavrov. Look at him smoking that cigarette. There you go. There, the defense minister. Smoking cigarettes is verboten in Western culture now. You're not allowed to smoke. Smoking's bad, right? I was in Dollywood recently, and they have smokers pits all over the place. There's like nice benches and plants. And like, it's super nice. So I was looking for a bench to sit down and eat something on. And I found this little bench. I was like, oh, look, it's a little segregated bench. There's a nice little bush. You know, I don't have to watch people or anything like that. We could just eat nice and quiet. And then some lady walked up and started smoking. And I was like, oh, this is the smokers area. And there was indeed an ashtray right there. And it was like, enjoy your cigarette type deal. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. So being former smokers, I high-fived the woman and continued to eat my funnel cake. Hen says the United Nations is officially calling to isolate the United States. She says we should give the United States what they want, isolation. And I don't think that's an idle threat, except that the United States is transforming global trade in real time and resetting global finance through the metals market. Maybe. Might be watching that. If all of the banks shorted silver, and they did, and they are all forced to settle their silver or pay out in value, the cash value, again, I look at this in terms of chess and it looks like they're checkmated, but I don't know. Maybe they'll rewrite the rules and say, yes, but this time we're not going to do that because that would end the game, and they don't want to end the game. So maybe. Here's this lady calling to isolate the United States.
We'll stay calm, we'll not panic, and we'll remember that the international community is made of 193 states. And this is the time to give the US what it has been looking for, isolation. We'll stay calm, we'll not panic, and we'll remember that...
Isolation. They want isolation. So let's give it to them, she says. Yeah, right. Sure. They're being magmatic. Here you go. We're being so nice to you. Wealth Moose, let's talk about healthcare, because healthcare is a disaster. And how bad does it have to get before people demand that we have better? Wealth Moose says Canadians are dying. 15,000 died while waiting for surgery last year. It's 74,000 plus since 2018. I don't know why we arbitrarily choose 2018. I know that we had data from 2015, 16, 17 in 2018. Is that gone now? Have they swept it up? Anyway, ER is overflowing. Hallway medicine normalized. Yet $36 billion is sent overseas. If healthcare is provincial, why is Ukraine federal? Why, when Canadians die waiting and foreign aid flows freely, priorities are exposed. We're borrowing to fund foreign commitments while Canadians can't find doctors, while domestic commitments go unanswered. Charity begins at home. Governments are elected to serve their own citizens first, not Ukraine. Enough excuses, enough deflection, enough deaths. Fix Canadian healthcare now. Part of the reason that the announcement for money for Ukraine was on the Friday of the Christmas week is because nobody pays attention to politics on Friday of the Christmas week. Everybody's busy doing everything else. They're visiting family. They don't want to talk about politics because, politics is too much like work. There are all sorts of things like that. And we are in a situation where they announce things like this on times where they know during holidays. It's like a Friday night news dump. They get time for the news cycle to cycle through a couple of things. We're having supposed to be a big storm today and tomorrow and whatever in southwestern Ontario. So the news cycle will be all weather all the time, climate change, bullshit, blah, blah, blah. And we are going to not hear anything more about this $2.5 billion to Ukraine. And that's bad. But that's predictable because that's the system that we live under. And the 24-hour news cycle is meant to wash our brains, not to keep us informed. Okay, so there's usually one or two big stories of the day, and everything else is kind of background stuff, right? But yeah, I don't know. We don't need a 24-hour news channel, that's for sure. Kenny Yu says, my father Peter died in North York General Hospital of Toronto, Canada on September 28th due to unhandled cardiac tamponade for over 72 hours and no telemetry and no oxygen. He died in an empty ward with no one attending. The doctors and the hospitals have no answers, and they're still rightfully harming people every day. No one told my mom he was that severe until we learned from the medical records. My mom collapsed on the road to the hospital in a morning when she heard my father was dead. It's still up to date. No mainstream media have covered it. So yeah, lots of horror stories. And again, I've had some emails directly listing people's horror stories of their loved ones passing in dignified ways. And that's terrible. And I don't understand how long. I understand why. The mechanism is such that there aren't enough people. It's like not healthcare. It's like education. The number of parents is dwarfed by the number of non-parents and non-parents of people in school. So parents who have kids out of school don't care anymore. They're not as engaged with that. And so you never get it as a really, really big concern. There are other bigger concerns that cross parental lines, and school's not one of them. So it never reaches that terminal velocity. Same with this. Healthcare is bad, but it never reaches that terminal velocity because there's a limiter on the throughput, and the limiter is age. The limiter is how many people can be churned through the system. And now with MAID, I mean, there's excuses that people can use. Well, sure, they weren't sick, but they wanted to die because they were mentally ill. And I mean, not in this case, but again, there are horror stories of Canadian healthcare. And again, I think there are good people in Canadian healthcare who just want to do a good job, but our system makes it very difficult for those people to be able to do a good job, and those people know it. And so it's like school, right? These people know that what the school is pushing is cracked. And a lot of them, I've seen workers, especially when they're interacting with me, trying desperately not to let that influence their classroom, but it permeates everything. Like when there's pride flags everywhere, kids see that and understand what it means, and they're resisting, they're pushing back as well. I think it's very interesting. This guy's talking about money to Ukraine, and he's talking about the overall broken system. Oh man, I've got to say goodbye to this stream. If you want the whole show, head over to CanadaPoly.com. If not, that's okay. I'll be around tomorrow. And we've got a kitchen table talk today as well. I've sent the email out, so it'll be fun to chat with everybody about Christmas and Ukraine and what's going on with everything else, because it's nuts, absolutely bonkers, and like the Minnesota fraud. So it's gonna be a barn burner today. So anyway, if you want the whole show, head over to CanadaPoly.com. If not, that's okay. We'll be around tomorrow and later on today. And for everybody else, we'll carry on as soon as I kill the stream. Yeah, it's done. Done. All right, this guy is talking about the broader conspiracy, and this is silver. So the broader conspiracy and how silver is another plank in dismantling the global control grid that has been set up. Part of that control grid is having full control of the price of things like silver. And they have had full control of the price of silver up until Christmas Day 2025. And Christmas Day 2025, price of silver broke out and they're losing control. And as I said at the top, does this lead to the dissolution of central banking because it's insolvent, because the system fundamentally is cracked and doesn't work? And will that force a change in the world? Plausible. I don't know for sure, but very plausible. Here we go.
We're watching a global system get dismantled.